Hello, my name is Christina Forbes, as you, the viewers, are getting to know. I am the wife of a seriously injured worker named Lorne Forbes. Today I'm going to use this video to explain a little bit more in detail about the passion and stuff of the other videos. So in other words, I'm going to explain Lorne's story. Lorne Forbes, at the time of his first injury, was a very happy, healthy, contributing member to society who worked at drywall finishing, 18 something years. Has always worked with his hands and his arms. Loved drywall very, very much. One day at work was underestimating a door header, and with the weight of him on the stilts that he was on, the end result was 3 compression fractures of the thoracic spine. Um, Due to classic WorkSafeBC misfiling, my husband's wage loss couldn't be found. Your employer didn't send it. We don't have it. Your employer didn't send it. Yada, yada, yada. I'm sure you, the viewer, have been there. So they gave my husband $39 or $89 a week, pardon me, to live off of. $89 a week. And, well, $89 a week doesn't feed much. Definitely does not feed and clothe and house a family of 5. So, like many other injured workers, and like any good man, he told his adjudicator at the time, I do believe her name was Cynthia. I can't remember her last name at the time, but when I start bringing up the files, I'm sure I'll have it done. Told Lorne that, well, Mr. Forbes, you got to do what you got to do. And without a clearance letter for his employer, they let him go back to work. So they were still paying for his pain medication, they were still paying for his rehabilitation, and they let him go back to work. Probably not the smartest part on their part. No clearance letter yet, you let him go back to work. So he stayed at home from the end of April until I think it was the first week of August or so. And you can't do anymore, right? You got to go back to work. You got to support the family. Sucked it up and went back to work, not fully healed. Um, September 19th, 2005, a month after returning to work from the first injury, he fell off of some scaffolding and shattered both of his arms. End result was a lot of fractures. The physiotherapist quit counting after 13. Just there was no point. So that day, after I got the phone call from the hospital in Campbell River that they were rushing Lorne to Comox to deal with his injuries because they couldn't help him there, I phoned his adjudicator, Cynthia, to let her know what was going on, and that Lorne had just fallen and broken both of his arms at work. As we were both crying on the phone, wondering what the heck to do now, considering Lorne had just gotten back to work without a clearance letter. What we were going to do. Um, so I the same thing, he was at the hospital. His employer actually had to give him a ride home that night from Comox to Sayward, which is about a 3.5-hour drive. In partial cast because of the swelling and stuff in Lorne's arms. They couldn't do much for him at that time, so they put him in partial cast and booked a surgery for the following week to try and assess his arms at that point. WorkSafeBC paid for his ride back down to Comox, but didn't pay for his ride home after the surgery. Lorne's little old mother actually had to drive him from Cumberland to Sayward in 2 full casts. The man should have had an ambulance ride home. we're going to talk about how just after, about a week after Lorne fell and broke his arms, how Lorne's wage loss was miraculously found, and according to Cynthia, was misfiled. So we went from $89 a week to the maximum, which is like 15 something. Who knows? It was crazy. Um, and we're going to talk about how WorkSafeBC didn't pay for home care or nurses aid because we live rural, because it's too expensive, and how they forced the responsibility of home care and nurses aid on Lorne, and in turn forced it on me. At this time, Lorne couldn't fend for himself, much like a young baby. He couldn't feed himself, dress himself, scratch himself, get a drink. He couldn't wipe his bum, pick his nose, scratch his balls. None of these things. All of these things are forced onto the wives of injured workers. Now, I don't know, maybe it would have been different if we lived in the city because it wouldn't have been so expensive. But, they weren't about to pay the $65 an hour for home care as well as $65 an hour plus mileage for a nurse, given the strong medication that Lorne was on at this time. So I had to administer his medication, and at sometimes, he was going through 120 Percocets a week. What do I know? The guy's in pain. Here, eat them. Like, I'm not a nurse. I'm not qualified to take care of a full-grown injured man that weighed, the better part at that time of 230 something pounds, to wipe his bum and to feed him and to comfort and clothe him and watch his wounds and so on and so forth. This is something that WorkSafeBC should have paid for, but they neglected to do. We're going to get into how they denied my children the chance to see a doctor because they denied transportation. They only allowed transportation for certain things, like Lorne to get to the doctor, to the bank, to his physio, and to the superstore. And at the beginning of when WorkSafeBC started to pay for his transportation, I wasn't even actually allowed to go. They expected Lorne to get one of the checkout people at the front, like those little the receipt checkers at Superstore, they expected one of them to go around with Lorne and to do his groceries. Although the guy can't push a fucking grocery, at that time couldn't push a grocery cart, can't still to this day push a grocery cart, let alone in 2 full casts. We're going to talk about how, you know, WorkSafeBC says my husband has made or had made $33,000 the year that he was injured. Revenue Canada has audited our ass and found a lot more money that he made the year that he was injured. How WorkSafeBC 3 years later have just paid my husband over $33,000 in wage loss benefits, people. But yet, for some reason, to date, his rehabilitation expenses keep going through the roof. And I'm going to look forward to showing you those, his wage loss stubs, because, in the 3 years that Lorne has been with WorkSafeBC, that they've been his sponsor or whatever, they have paid over $100,000 in rehabilitation expenses. But yet my husband has to pay for his own pain medication. He hasn't been to rehab in over 2 years, hasn't had any sort of rehabilitation much at all, let alone over $100,000 worth on his claim, people. Like, that's alarming to me. In fact, I'd like to know where they justify over $100,000 worth of rehabilitation care expenses on my husband's claim. Because my husband has not received that kind of care. Because if he had, I wouldn't be sitting here on YouTube doing this right now. And I'm just about ready to run at the 10-minute marker, which makes it a little bit tricky for uploading videos on YouTube. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to piece this one out. I'm going to go on to part 2 of our story, and that's exactly what it will be titled, Our Story, Part 2. And it'll be uploaded pretty much right after this one, so feel free to go ahead and click on that. Thank you.